70,000 years ago, something changed. For 200,000 years, your ancestors had lived in Africa. They had survived droughts. They had survived predators. They had survived each other. They had built everything they needed to stay. And then they left. Not all of them. A small group. Estimates suggest fewer than 10,000 people. Some researchers say as few as 1,000. A population so small that modern humans today carry the genetic signature of that bottleneck. Every person alive on Earth right now is descended from that small group that crossed out of Africa 70,000 years ago. Every single one. No exceptions. The question that has occupied evolutionary biologists and archaeologists for decades is not where they went. We know where they went. The question is what pushed them. What made a small group of humans leave the only home their species had ever known and walk into the unknown? The first answer was simple. They were looking for food. Resources were scarce. The population had grown beyond what the land could support. They followed the animals. This answer satisfied researchers for a long time. It was logical. It was clean. It matched what we know about how populations expand. Then the genetic evidence arrived, and the simple answer became considerably more complicated. The genetic data showed that the group that left Africa was not large and expanding, it was tiny and shrinking. Population geneticist Spencer Wells at the National Geographic Society spent years mapping the genetic signatures of the human migration out of Africa. What he found was not a population overflow. It was a population collapse. In the period immediately before the migration out of Africa, the human population had dropped catastrophically from an estimated 10 million people to somewhere between 1 and 10,000. Something had nearly wiped humans out completely, and the people who left Africa were the survivors. In 1993, geological researcher Michael Rampino at New York University proposed something that the scientific community initially dismissed. He connected the human population collapse to a specific geological event. The eruption of Mount Toba in what is now Sumatra, Indonesia. Approximately 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba erupted, not in the way volcanoes usually erupt. It was the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 million years. It ejected approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. For comparison, the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991 ejected 10 cubic kilometers. Toba ejected 2,800. The ash cloud spread across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. 6 inches of ash settled across the Indian subcontinent. The atmospheric debris blocked sunlight globally for an estimated 6 to 10 years. Temperatures dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius worldwide. Researchers call this a volcanic winter. It nearly ended the human story before it had properly begun. Professor Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois spent years studying the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. His research, published in 1998 in the Journal of Human Evolution, connected the genetic bottleneck directly to the eruption. The humans who survived Toba survived in small, isolated refugia, pockets of land where conditions remained survivable, where food still existed, where the ash had not completely eliminated the ecosystem. East Africa was one of those refugia. The genetic evidence suggests the entire surviving human population on Earth was concentrated in a region of East Africa, equivalent in size to a modern state. For years, possibly decades, a species reduced to a remnant, holding on not because of intelligence or planning or any of the qualities we associate with human superiority, but because of geography, because they happened to be in a place the ash did not fully reach, because survival in that moment was not earned, it was accidental. But the Toba hypothesis is not the complete answer, because there is a gap between the eruption 74,000 years ago and the migration 70,000 years ago, 4,000 years of recovery, 4,000 years of rebuilding, and then they left, not during the catastrophe, after it, which means something else drove the final departure. Researcher Curtis Marean at Arizona State University spent years excavating sites on the southern coast of South Africa. What he found was a population that had learned something during the volcanic winter. They had learned to exploit coastal resources, shellfish, marine life, food sources that did not depend on the unstable inland ecosystem that Toba had destroyed. And those coastal resources existed in a continuous line from South Africa all the way around the Indian Ocean coastline and into the rest of the world. The coast was a road and they followed it. But following a road requires a decision, a moment where someone looked at what lay ahead and chose to keep moving rather than stay. Psychologist Mark van Vugt at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam has spent his career studying human migration psychology. His research on the evolutionary basis of exploration behavior found something precise. Humans are the only species that regularly migrates beyond the range of previous experience, not following known routes, not tracking familiar prey. Moving into territory that no member of the group had ever seen, other animals migrate, but they migrate along known corridors between known endpoints. Humans deliberately move into the unknown, and the psychological driver of that behavior is not curiosity in the simple sense. It is a specific discomfort, a restlessness that makes staying feel more threatening than leaving. A feeling that the known is no longer enough, that something necessary exists somewhere ahead, that the cost of staying exceeds the cost of going. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar at Oxford University has studied the social structure of early human groups for decades. His research on what became known as Dunbar's number identified the cognitive limit of human social groups, approximately 150 people, the maximum number of relationships the human brain can maintain with genuine social knowledge. Above that number, the social fabric begins to fracture. Trust becomes harder to maintain, conflict becomes harder to resolve. The mechanisms that kept small groups cohesive, shared history, personal accountability, the inability to disappear into anonymity, stop working, and the groups that grew beyond that number after the Toba recovery began to fracture, to splinter, to produce subgroups that needed new territory. Not because the land could not support them, because the social structure could not contain them. The migration out of Africa was not one journey. It was thousands of small departures, each one driven by a group of people who had become too large for their relationships and too small for safety. Geneticist Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza at Stanford University spent 40 years mapping the genetic history of human migration. His work, published in 1994 in the History and Geography of Human Genes, documented the specific routes the migration took: south along the African coast, across the mouth of the Red Sea, along the coastline of the Indian Ocean, into South Asia, into East Asia, across the land bridge into the Americas. The entire planet populated by the descendants of that tiny surviving group. But what his genetic data also showed was the pace. The migration was not slow. It was not gradual in the way most people imagine. The movement from Africa to the southern tip of Australia took approximately 10,000 years. 10,000 years to cross half the planet for a species that had spent 200,000 years in a single continent. Something was pushing, not just pulling. The unknown ahead was not the primary driver. What lay behind them was, you carry this in your body, not metaphorically, genetically. Every anxiety you have ever felt about staying somewhere too long, every restlessness that arrives without a clear reason, every feeling that you need to be somewhere else, that what is ahead is necessary even though you cannot name it, that the cost of staying is somehow higher than you can justify. These are not personality traits, they are not symptoms of something wrong. They are the psychological inheritance of a species that survived the largest volcanic eruption in 2 million years by moving that populated an entire planet. Not because they were brave, but because staying felt more dangerous than going, because the known had failed them, the land they had always trusted had gone dark and cold and stopped providing. And the only option that the surviving brain could generate was the same option it had always generated when the environment became too threatening to endure. Move, find something better ahead. Trust that the coastline continues. Trust that the road does not end. The people who trusted that are your ancestors, every single one of them. The ones who stayed did not become you. Only the ones who left became you. And on some level that you do not have a clean language for yet. You have always known you were made for something ahead of you, not behind.